You can't do this. I am the president of this association. This is my community. Her voice was a shriek, a sound like metal tearing, echoing off the beige stucco walls of the community clubhouse. It was the sound of a queen watching her castle, built on a foundation of petty rules and intimidation, crumble into dust. And I, the man she had tried to grind under her heel for 6 months, was the one holding the sledgehammer. It felt even better than I had imagined. But to understand how we got here, how a quiet civil engineer ended up publicly dismantling the life of the neighborhood tyrant, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a can of paint and a ridiculous, soul-crushing shade of gray. After my wife, Martha, passed away, the silence in our big house became a physical weight. Every room held a memory, every corner echoed with a laugh I'd never hear again. I lasted a year before I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a fresh start, a smaller space where the quiet was a choice, not a haunting. I found a house in a planned community called Willow Creek Estates, a name that promised tranquility and babbling brooks but delivered cookie-cutter houses and an oppressive sense of order. Still, it was clean, it was quiet, and it was supposed to be simple. I was a structural engineer. I craved order, but the kind built on logic and physics, not on the whims of a homeowners association. I should have seen the first red flag when the realtor handed me the HOA bylaws, a document thicker than the foundation code for a skyscraper. It was a tome of suburban dogma, dictating everything from the acceptable species of lawn grass to the maximum allowable height of a garden gnome. I skimmed it, figured I was a reasonable guy who kept to himself, and signed on the dotted line. My first project was the front door. It was a hideous shade of sun-bleached mauve. I wanted something dignified, something calm. I chose a color called Iron Mountain, a deep, solid gray that felt dependable. I even cross-referenced the color chip with the approved palette in the HOA Bible. It was a perfect match for Slate Gray No. 7. I spent a satisfying weekend painting it, the simple, methodical work a balm for my frayed nerves. That's when I first met Brenda. She didn't walk so much as march, her body held rigid with an unearned sense of authority. She was a woman in her mid-50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could deflect small arms fire and a face permanently pinched in a state of disapproval. She was holding a clipboard, the universal scepter of petty tyrants everywhere. "Good morning," I said, offering a neighborly smile as I admired my handiwork. She stopped on the public sidewalk, her eyes narrowing at my front door as if it had personally insulted her. "That color is not approved." Her tone was flat, accusatory. Not a hello, not a welcome to the neighborhood, just an immediate declaration of my failure to comply. "Oh, I think it is," I replied, still trying to keep things pleasant. I checked the bylaws. "It's slate gray No. 7". "I am Brenda, the HOA president," she announced, as if that settled the matter. "And I'm telling you it's not slate gray No. 7. It has too much blue in the undertones. It's disruptive to the community's aesthetic harmony." Aesthetic harmony. I almost laughed. Every house on the street was a variation of the same beige box. My door was the only thing with a hint of personality. "I have the paint can right here," I offered, gesturing toward the garage. "We can check the code." "That won't be necessary," she snapped. "You'll receive a formal notice of violation. You have 14 days to repaint it to an acceptable shade. A list of pre-approved painters is available on the community website." And with that, she turned and marched away, leaving me standing there, a phantom chill in the warm morning air. It was absurd, of course. A ridiculous power trip. I wasn't going to repaint my door. I sent a polite email to the HOA board, attaching a photo of my paint can next to the approved color swatch in the bylaws. The evidence was irrefutable. I expected a quiet apology, an admission of the mistake. What I got instead was the first fine. $100. The official letter cited my failure to cure the violation and my unwillingness to cooperate with community standards. It was signed, in a self-important, looping script, by Brenda. That was the first shot fired. I had no idea then that it was the start of a war, one that would escalate from passive-aggressive notices to outright criminal acts. I just thought I was dealing with a difficult woman. I had miscalculated the depths of her obsession with control. I paid the fine, foolishly thinking it would be the end of it. I told myself it was a $100 tax for a quiet life. But I didn't repaint the door. It was a small thing, but it was mine. That door became my little hill to die on. Brenda did not forget. A week later, another notice appeared, this time taped to my freshly painted door with adhesive so strong it peeled off a sliver of paint when I removed it. This fine was for my recycling bin. It had been left at the curb until 7 p.m. on collection day. The bylaws, she helpfully highlighted, stipulated that all bins must be retrieved and stored out of sight by 6 p.m. Another $100. I started to feel a slow burn of anger. This wasn't about community standards, this was punishment. It was a message. I was being targeted. The next month, it was the grass. A small patch near the sidewalk had turned slightly brown in the summer heat. Failure to maintain lawn health, the notice read. Another $100. I started documenting everything. I took pictures of the notices, saved every email, and started a logbook detailing each interaction, each petty accusation. My engineering mind kicked in. Data was everything. If you have enough data, you can understand any system, even one as irrational as Brenda's reign of terror. I was building a case, though I wasn't yet sure who I would present it to. The real escalation began on the 1st of October. I came out one morning to find my front left tire completely flat. It wasn't a slow leak, it was a puncture. A clean, sharp slice in the sidewall. Irreparable. I called a tow truck and spent $400 on a new tire. I thought it was a random act of vandalism, a piece of bad luck. I filed a police report, but the officer was blunt. No witnesses, no camera footage. There's nothing we can do. Happens all the time. Then, on the 1st of November, it happened again. Same tire. Front left. Another clean slice in the sidewall. This was no longer random. This was a message, delivered with a blade in the dead of night. My blood ran cold. This had crossed a line from petty harassment into something much more sinister. Who would do this? The only person I had a conflict with in this entire state was Brenda. But surely not. Slashing tires. That was criminal. It was unhinged. I called the police again. A different officer came this time, but the response was the same. Sympathy, but no action. You should consider getting a security camera, he suggested before he left. I thought about it, but a part of me was still in denial. I was a quiet man. I didn't have enemies. The idea of living in a home where I needed surveillance to feel safe felt like a defeat. On the 1st of December, it happened again. Like clockwork. Front left tire, sliced open. Another $400, another useless police report. The anger I felt was now a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The peace I had moved here to find was a distant memory. My home felt besieged. Every creak of the floorboards at night made me jump. Every car that slowed down on the street sent a jolt of anxiety through me. She was doing this to me. I had no proof, but I knew it in my bones. It was her. The methodical, repetitive nature of the act, same day of the month, same tire, it reeked of her obsessive, controlling personality. The turning point wasn't the tires, though. It was what she did to Martha's rose bush. Martha had been an avid gardener. Before she got sick, our old yard was a riot of color. The one thing I brought with me from that house was a single, hardy rose bush she had cultivated for years. It produced the most beautiful, deep red blossoms. I planted it right by my front porch. It was the one piece of the old life I couldn't let go of. I came home from work one afternoon to find it butchered. The branches were hacked to pieces, the remaining leaves sprayed with some kind of chemical that was already turning them a sickly yellow. A small, neatly printed sign was staked in the mutilated soil. Non-approved flora. Per HOA Bylaw 17, Section C, I stood there, staring at the ruin of the last living thing Martha had touched, and the cold knot of anger in my stomach ignited into a white-hot rage. This was no longer about a front door or recycling bins. This wasn't about money or rules. She had trespassed on my property. She had destroyed something deeply personal, something sacred. She had taken my grief and trampled it under her feet for the sake of a bylaw that probably didn't even exist. That was the moment I stopped being a victim. That was the moment I decided to fight back. And I wasn't going to fight her on her turf, with her petty rules and fines. I was an engineer. I was going to dismantle her, piece by piece, using logic, evidence, and the full, unyielding weight of the law. The war had begun, and I was going to finish it. My first step was to approach the problem like any complex engineering project: gather data. I needed to understand the system I was up against. Brenda was the face of the HOA, but she wasn't the entire structure. I requested a copy of the HOA's recent financial statements, meeting minutes, and a full list of active contracts, all of which I was entitled to as a homeowner. The initial response was a stonewalling email from Brenda, stating that my request was unusual and disruptive, but a follow-up email citing the specific state statute that compelled them to comply produced the documents a week later. I spent my evenings poring over the files. It was mostly boring stuff: invoices for landscaping, pool maintenance, insurance premiums. But I was looking for patterns, for anomalies. And I found one. A big one. The contract for road maintenance. Over the past year, the HOA had paid over $200,000 to a company called Apex Paving Solutions for asphalt repair and resurfacing. The cost seemed exorbitant for the small network of private roads in our community. But what really caught my eye was the signature on the contract approvals. It wasn't Brenda's. It was her husband's. Gary. I did a little digging. Gary, as it turned out, was the deputy director of the city's public works department. His specific area of oversight: road construction and municipal paving contracts. It was a glaring conflict of interest, but not yet proof of anything illegal. However, my engineer's brain was buzzing. I'd noticed the roads in our neighborhood. The newly resurfaced sections were already showing signs of alligator cracking and raveling. The top layer of asphalt was literally coming apart. This was a classic sign of a poor quality mix or improper application. It was shoddy work, the kind of work that wouldn't last 2 years, let alone the 10 it was supposed to. This was my opening. Brenda's power in the neighborhood was absolute, but it was a small kingdom. Her husband's world was bigger, with more rules, and much more serious consequences for breaking them. I suspected Brenda's petty tyranny was being funded by something far more corrupt. Her power wasn't just social, it was financial. The HOA was her personal slush fund, and the paving contract was the spigot. Now I had a theory, but I needed proof. Hard, empirical data. My next move felt like something out of a spy movie. Late one night, dressed in dark clothes, I went out with a hammer drill fitted with a 4-inch core bit. I walked to a section of the road that had been recently paved by Apex Paving Solutions, a spot conveniently obscured from view by a row of dense hedges. The drill whined in the quiet night, and in a few minutes, I had what I wanted: a perfect, cylindrical core sample of the asphalt, about 6 inches long. I slipped it into a canvas bag, then filled the small hole with a cold patch compound I'd brought with me. By morning, no one would ever know I'd been there. The next day, I overnight the sample to a materials testing lab I had used for professional projects, a lab run by an old college friend named Tom. I included a simple and signed note: please run a full component analysis. Test for binder content, aggregate quality, and compaction level. Compare against standard municipal specifications. Invoice to the attached P.O. box. I was compartmentalizing, keeping my name off it for now. While I waited for the lab results, I focused on phase 2 of my plan: catching Brenda in the act of vandalism. The police were right, I needed a camera. But not just any camera. I needed something foolproof, something that would capture her face, her actions, and the date and time in undeniable, high-definition clarity. I spent a week researching. I needed night vision, a wide field of view, motion activation, and most importantly, it had to be completely invisible. I found the perfect device. It was a small, weatherproof camera designed for wildlife observation. Its real genius was its camouflage. It was housed inside a fake rock, the kind people use to hide a spare key. It was utterly innocuous. I bought it, along with a high-capacity memory card and a backup battery pack. Installation was a project in itself. I couldn't just place it on the lawn; she might notice something new. I needed it to be part of the landscape. I chose a spot in the flower bed directly across from my driveway, the one where Martha's mangled rose bush used to be. I spent an afternoon gardening, carefully digging a small trench to run a low-voltage power cable from an outdoor outlet to the camera's location, burying it a few inches underground. I positioned the fake rock, angling it perfectly to give me a clear, unobstructed shot of the front left side of my car. I tested the live feed on my phone. The picture was crystal clear. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait. The end of the month was approaching. The 1st of January. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist. Her obsessive-compulsive need for this monthly ritual was the very weakness I was exploiting. On New Year's Eve, I parked my car in its usual spot. I checked the camera feed one last time. Everything was perfect. I went to bed that night feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and grim anticipation. I was baiting a wild animal, and I just had to hope it would step into my snare. I woke up before dawn on New Year's Day. The first thing I did, before even making coffee, was check my car. And there it was. The front left tire was completely flat, gaping open with a familiar, vicious slice. A cold smile touched my lips. She did it. The predictable, arrogant fool actually did it. I didn't rush. I calmly made coffee, then sat down at my computer. With trembling hands, I accessed the camera's memory card remotely. I scrolled through the motion-activated clips from the night before. There were a few clips of cars passing by, one of a raccoon scurrying across my lawn. And then, there it was. A clip time-stamped 2:17 a.m. My heart hammered in my chest as I clicked play. The video was stunningly clear, illuminated by the faint glow of a street lamp. A figure, bundled in a dark hooded jacket, scurried across the street. The person approached my car, head on a swivel, checking for any signs of witnesses. Then, the figure pulled back the hood. It was her. Brenda. Her face, pinched with malice, was perfectly clear. She looked like a gargoyle in the grainy night vision. She pulled a small, wicked-looking box cutter from her pocket, knelt down, and with a series of quick, angry jabs, plunged the blade into the sidewall of my tire. The hiss of escaping air was audible even on the video's microphone. She stood up, a look of smug satisfaction on her face, pulled her hood back up, and scurried away into the darkness. I watched the video 3 times. It was more damning than I could have ever hoped for. It was irrefutable. I saved the file to my hard drive, then uploaded it to a secure cloud server. I made 3 separate copies on encrypted thumb drives. This was my silver bullet. But I wasn't going to use it yet. A simple vandalism charge was letting her off easy. This was just one piece of the puzzle. I was building a mosaic of her downfall, and I needed all the tiles in place before the final reveal. 2 days later, the report from Tom's lab arrived at my P.O. box. I opened the envelope, my hand steadier this time. The results were worse, or better, from my perspective, than I had anticipated. The report was dense with technical jargon, but the summary on the final page was written in plain English. The asphalt sample failed to meet municipal code on 7 different metrics. The binder content was dangerously low, cheap filler aggregate had been used instead of specified crushed stone, and the compaction density was so poor that the report noted it was structurally unsound and posed a significant risk of premature failure and pothole formation. It concluded, in Tom's typically blunt style, "This isn't road-grade asphalt. It's garbage." Whoever signed off on this was either an idiot or a crook. I had it all now. I had Brenda on video committing a crime. And I had a lab report that strongly implicated her husband, Gary, in a massive case of municipal fraud. The shoddy roads weren't just about cheating the HOA, they were a public safety hazard. This was bigger than Willow Creek Estates now. This was a felony. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week. It was usually a dull affair, held in the drab community clubhouse, where Brenda would drone on about lawn clippings and parking violations. But this time, it was going to be different. It was going to be the opening act of her demise. I wasn't going to show the video. Not yet. I was going to set the stage, to bait the hook one more time. I was going to give her the opportunity to lie, to perjure herself in front of her loyal subjects, before I brought the whole rotten structure crashing down around her. The night of the HOA meeting, the clubhouse was filled with the usual suspects, a handful of retirees, a few young couples who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and Brenda, sitting at the head table like a queen holding court. She ran through the agenda with her usual brisk, self-important air. Then she came to new business. As some of you may be aware, she began, her eyes scanning the room before landing on me, we continue to have issues with certain residents who refuse to abide by our community's established standards. She didn't use my name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. A few of my neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This creates an environment of disharmony and disrespects the investment we have all made in our properties. She paused for dramatic effect. Furthermore, there has been a recurring issue of vandalism in our community. Specifically, property damage to vehicles. She looked directly at me again, a flicker of something, a taunt, a challenge, in her eyes. It is truly a shame when one person's negative presence brings such criminal elements into our otherwise peaceful neighborhood. The implication was clear. She was suggesting that I, the victim, was somehow responsible for the attacks. That I had brought this on myself. The audacity of it was breathtaking. My rage, which I had kept on a cold simmer, began to boil. This was my moment. I raised my hand. Brenda's eyes narrowed. Yes, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. On the subject of the vandalism, I began, my voice calm and steady, I may have some information that could help the police. A murmur went through the small crowd. Brenda's expression didn't change, but I saw her hands tighten on the edge of the table. And what information would that be? Well, I said, leaning forward slightly, after the third time my tire was slashed, I followed the advice of the police and invested in a rather high-end security system. It has excellent night vision. On the morning of January 1st, at approximately 2:17 a.m., it recorded a very clear video of the individual responsible for the damage. The room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the cheap linoleum floor. I had everyone's attention. Brenda's face was a mask of stone, but I could see a tiny muscle twitching in her jaw. The video is in full high definition, I continued, letting the words hang in the air. It captures the person's face, the weapon they used, a simple box cutter, and the act itself. It's quite damning. I was planning on turning it over to the detectives tomorrow morning, but I thought I'd mention it here first. In the spirit of community. I didn't accuse her. I didn't need to. I just laid the facts on the table and let the implication do the work. I watched her, waiting for the reaction I knew would come. For a moment, she just stared at me, her mind clearly racing. Then, the mask cracked, and the venom spilled out. This is outrageous, she shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. You are harassing me. You are fabricating this nonsense to deflect from your own violations. A few of the board members looked at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. I haven't accused anyone of anything, Brenda, I said calmly. I simply stated that I have a video of the person who has been vandalizing my property. Why would that be a threat to you? You are a liar, she screamed, her face turning a blotchy red. You are a sick man who gets his kicks from tormenting people. I will not be intimidated. I will have you removed from this community. I will sue you for slander. She was spiraling, just as I had predicted. Her guilt was a physical thing, pouring off her in waves of hysterical rage. She was incriminating herself with every word, showing everyone in that room her true, unhinged nature. My neighbors, who had once looked at me with suspicion, were now staring at her with wide, disillusioned eyes. The first cracks in her foundation were showing. She had walked right into my trap, and the jaws were just beginning to close. Brenda's meltdown at the meeting was just the beginning. The next day, her retaliation began, and it was far more vicious than I had anticipated. She had been publicly embarrassed, her authority questioned for the first time, and she reacted like a cornered animal. She went nuclear. It started with a smear campaign. A letter, printed on official HOA letterhead, was slipped under every door in the neighborhood. It warned residents about a disruptive individual who was exhibiting threatening behavior and making false accusations against board members. It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. It spoke of my history of noncompliance and cautioned residents to avoid engaging with me for their own safety. It was a pathetic attempt to poison the well, to isolate me before I could present my evidence. A few of my more timid neighbors started avoiding my gaze when I checked the mail. Then, she escalated. She called my employer. I was a senior engineer at a large, reputable firm with city contracts. A call from an angry community leader, accusing one of their top engineers of harassment and creating a hostile living environment, was not taken lightly. I was called into my boss's office. He was a good man, fair but firm. He looked concerned. "Look, Mark," he said, folding his hands on his desk. "I know this is probably nonsense. But a complaint has been made. We have to take it seriously. I need to know, is there anything I should be worried about?" I looked him in the eye. "There is absolutely nothing to worry about," I told him. "I'm the victim of a targeted harassment campaign by a very unstable person. I have evidence to prove it. It will all be resolved very soon, and her name will be in the news for all the wrong reasons." He searched my face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. I'll take you at your word. But resolve it, Mark. Quickly." The threat to my livelihood was a serious blow. This was no longer just about my peace at home, it was about my reputation, my career. But Brenda wasn't done. Her final act of desperation was the most despicable. She called Child Protective Services. My son, a college student, had been home for the holidays, and she had seen him. She filed an anonymous report, making baseless, disgusting claims about my home being an unsafe environment. A social worker showed up at my door, a kind but weary-looking woman who had clearly seen it all. She had to conduct a formal inspection. She had to ask me humiliating questions. I cooperated fully, my anger a cold, hard stone in my gut. After an hour, she closed her notebook. "Mr. Miller," she said with a sigh, "your home is immaculate. You've been cooperative. Frankly, this report has all the hallmarks of a malicious, false complaint, likely part of a neighborhood dispute. We get them all the time. We'll close the case, but I'm sorry you had to go through this." After she left, I sat in the silence of my house for a long time. She had tried to take my reputation. She had tried to take my job. And now, she had tried to use the system designed to protect children as a weapon to harm my family. The line had been crossed so many times I couldn't even see it anymore. Any lingering thoughts I had of a measured, proportional response evaporated. I was no longer interested in just stopping her. I wanted to destroy her. I wanted to see her entire world burn to the ground. It was time to bring in the final piece of the puzzle. It was time to expose the fraud. My lab report on the asphalt was the science, but I needed the human element. I needed to connect the shoddy work directly to Gary and the contractor, Apex Paving Solutions. I did some more digging into Apex. It was a small, relatively new company that seemed to have landed an improbable number of city and HOA contracts in the last 2 years, ever since Gary had been promoted to deputy director. The owner of Apex was a man named Vince. A quick search of his social media showed pictures of him and Gary on fishing trips, at barbecues. They were old friends. This was cronyism, plain and simple. Gary was feeding his buddy lucrative, no-bid contracts, and Vince was likely kicking back a portion of the profits. The substandard materials were how they maximized their take. They were saving a fortune by using garbage, billing the city and our HOA for premium materials, and pocketing the difference. But I still needed concrete proof of the financial link. A whistleblower. I thought about going to the local news, but I wanted to control the narrative. I decided to find someone who had a reason to hate Vince and Gary as much as I did. I looked up the public records for the city paving contracts that Apex had won. Then I looked up the companies that had been the runners-up in the bidding process. One name kept appearing, O'Malley Construction, a family-owned business that had been paving roads in this city for 50 years. I found the owner's name, Frank O'Malley. I called his office and left a simple message. "My name is Mark Miller. I'm a civil engineer. I have conclusive evidence of contract fraud related to Apex Paving Solutions, and I think we have a mutual interest in seeing that this information gets to the right people." Frank O'Malley called me back within the hour. He sounded wary, but intrigued. We met for coffee at a diner halfway across town. He was a big man in his 60s with hands like leather and a tired, honest face. "I've been losing bids to that clown Vince for 2 years, he told me, his voice a low grumble. "Doesn't make sense. I run a tight ship. My bids are competitive. But his always come in just under mine, every single time. It's like he knows my numbers before I even submit them." "He probably does," I said. "His best friend is Gary, the guy who awards the contracts." Frank's eyes widened. He let out a long, low whistle. Well, that explains a lot. I laid out my evidence on the table, a copy of the lab report, photos of the crumbling asphalt in my neighborhood, my analysis of the inflated invoices to the HOA. This is what they're doing, I said. They're using cheap, substandard materials, billing for premium, and Gary is signing off on it. It's a classic kickback scheme. And it's not just our HOA. It's happening all over the city. They're putting people at risk with these garbage roads. Frank stared at the report, his face grim. I knew it, he muttered. I knew something was rotten. I have a video of Gary's wife committing criminal vandalism against me, I added. I'm building a case that will take them both down. But I need one more piece. I need proof of the kickbacks. A money trail. You're in the industry. You must have contacts, people who have worked for Vince, people who might know something. Frank was silent for a long moment, stirring his coffee. Then he looked up at me, a new fire in his eyes. Vince has a foreman. A guy named Dave. He worked for me for 20 years before Vince poached him, offered him a ridiculous salary. Dave's a good man, but he has a conscience. And I've heard he's not happy over there. Let me make a call. 2 days later, I met Frank and Dave in the same diner. Dave was nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder. But after I showed him the lab report, his nervousness turned to anger. I knew it, he said, shaking his head. I told Vince this mix was garbage. It's barely holding together. He told me to shut up and lay it down. Said it was what the client wanted. Did you ever see any unusual payments? Anything that looked like a kickback to Gary? I asked. Dave hesitated, then took a deep breath. Every Friday, Vince takes a cash withdrawal from the company account. $10,000. He always marks it as miscellaneous job site expenses, but we don't have cash expenses like that. He told me it was for greasing the wheels one time. I saw him put the cash in an envelope and hand it to Gary at one of those barbecues. Can you get proof? I asked. Bank statements. Ledgers. Dave nodded slowly. I have access to the accounting software. I can download the transaction logs. That was it. The final, undeniable piece of evidence. The smoking gun that linked the shoddy work directly to the cash changing hands. Now I was ready. I had the video of Brenda. I had the lab report on the asphalt. And now, thanks to Dave, I would have the financial records proving the kickback scheme. It was time to stop gathering evidence and start deploying it. I wasn't just going to the local police anymore. This was bigger. This was wire fraud, conspiracy, and endangering the public. This was a case for the state. I spent the next day compiling everything into a neat, organized package. I wrote a cover letter, a detailed timeline of events, from the first fine for my door to the false CPS report. I included copies of the HOA notices, the lab report, the financial statements from Dave, and a sworn affidavit from him detailing what he had witnessed. And, of course, a thumb drive containing the crystal-clear video of Brenda, the HOA president, slashing my tire in the dead of night. I made an appointment with an investigator at the state attorney's office. I walked in, laid the package on his desk, and said, I think you're going to want to see this. The investigator, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Detective Russo, listened to my story without interruption. He watched the video. He read the lab report. He looked at the bank statements. When he was done, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me. Mr. Miller, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. You've just done our job for us. This is one of the cleanest cases of public corruption I've ever seen. The plan was set. The state would handle the criminal charges, but I wanted to be the one to deliver the public humiliation. I wanted Brenda and Gary to be exposed in front of the very community they had lorded over and defrauded. Detective Russo agreed. He said they would coordinate their actions with a final community meeting. I went to the HOA board, bypassing Brenda, and used a provision in the bylaws to call for a special, emergency meeting of all homeowners. The stated purpose, to discuss urgent matters of community safety and financial mismanagement. The board, already rattled by Brenda's public meltdown and the rumors swirling after my announcement, agreed immediately. The meeting was set for the following Wednesday. I also made a call to a reporter at the local TV station's investigative unit, the one who had a reputation for taking down corrupt officials. I gave him the time and place of the meeting, telling him it would be a story he wouldn't want to miss. The stage was set. All the players were in position. The final showdown was about to begin. The night of the special meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Word had spread like wildfire. This wasn't just the usual dozen attendees, it was nearly the entire neighborhood. People were standing along the walls, their faces a mixture of curiosity, anger, and anticipation. I had also invited the city council representative and, as promised, the news crew from Channel 4 was setting up a camera in the back. Brenda and Gary arrived late, striding in with an air of defiant arrogance. They clearly intended to seize control of the meeting and shut me down. Brenda took her seat at the head table, gavel in hand, while Gary stood behind her, a looming, silent presence. They saw the news camera, and a flicker of unease crossed Brenda's face, but her ego was too large to allow for retreat. "This meeting is now in session," Brenda announced, banging the gavel unnecessarily hard. "The first and only item of business is the baseless and slanderous accusations being made by—" "That's not the purpose of this meeting, Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through hers. I was standing at a lectern I had set up, a projector and screen behind me. "The homeowners called this meeting, and I am the first speaker." Before she could protest, I clicked the remote in my hand. The first slide appeared on the screen behind me. It was a photo of the first violation notice she had given me, the one for my unapproved front door. "It started with this," I said, my voice calm and clear, amplified by a small microphone I had brought. "A petty abuse of power. $100 fine for a door that was, in fact, fully compliant with the bylaws." I clicked again. A slide showing the second fine, for the recycling bin. Click. The third fine, for the brown patch of grass. It escalated into a campaign of targeted harassment, designed to punish me for daring to question her authority. Brenda was on her feet. "This is out of order. You have no right." "Please, sit down, Brenda," I said, my tone icy. "We're just getting to the interesting part." I clicked the remote again. The next slide was a photo of my slashed tire. When the fines didn't work, the harassment escalated to criminal activity. For 3 consecutive months, my tires were slashed, always on the first of the month, always the same tire. An act of vandalism that cost me over $1,200 and endangered my safety. A wave of gasps and murmurs swept through the room. People were looking from me to Brenda, who was standing frozen, her face pale. "The police were unable to help without evidence," I continued. "So I provided my own." I took a deep breath and clicked the remote. The video started to play. The screen showed my driveway, illuminated in the eerie green of night vision. And then, there she was. Brenda. Scurrying into the frame, her face a mask of concentrated malice. The crowd went dead silent. They watched, transfixed, as the president of their homeowners association, the woman who fined them for leaving their garage doors open, pulled out a box cutter and viciously stabbed my tire. The sound of the hissing air filled the quiet room. When the video ended, the silence was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with shock and disgust. No one looked at me. Every eye in the room was fixed on Brenda. Her face had collapsed. The arrogance, the authority, it all melted away, leaving behind the raw, ugly face of a common criminal caught in the act. "That video is a fake," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "It's doctored. He's a liar. He's been trying to destroy me from the day he moved in." Gary stepped forward, putting a hand on her shoulder. "That's enough," he said, his voice a low growl. "We're leaving." "And you," he said, pointing a thick finger at me, "you'll be hearing from our lawyer." "I don't think you're going anywhere, Gary," I said, my voice hardening. "Because this isn't just about slashed tires. It's about you." I clicked the remote again. The next slide was a title in big, bold letters, "Apex Paving Solutions and Municipal Fraud." Gary froze. The color drained from his face. "For the past year," I explained, my voice ringing with the authority of cold, hard facts, "our HOA has paid over $200,000 to a company called Apex Paving for road resurfacing. A company owned by your good friend, Vince." I put up a photo of Gary and Vince on a fishing boat, grinning for the camera. The problem, I went on, clicking to the next slide, which showed the executive summary from the lab report, is that the asphalt they used is garbage. It's structurally unsound, in violation of at least 7 municipal codes, and it's already falling apart. It's a public safety hazard that you, Gary, as Deputy Director of Public Works, approved. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder, angrier. People were looking at the crumbling roads they drove on every day in a new light. They were looking at the men who had endangered them. But why? I asked rhetorically. Why would a city official approve such shoddy work? Perhaps this will explain it. The final slide appeared. It was a copy of the bank statement from Apex Paving, showing a weekly $10,000 cash withdrawal. I had highlighted the memo, miscellaneous, job site expenses. This, I announced, my voice booming in the silent room, is the money you've been stealing. From us, the homeowners. And from every taxpayer in this city. A kickback scheme. $10,000 a week, in cash, paid by Vince to you, Gary, in exchange for lucrative, no-bid contracts using substandard materials. Gary looked like he had been punched in the gut. He stumbled back a step, his face ashen. Brenda was openly sobbing now, a pathetic, gulping sound. It's over, I said quietly. All of it. As if on cue, the double doors at the back of the clubhouse swung open. Detective Russo and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. The news camera swiveled to capture their entrance. Brenda and Gary Miller. Detective Russo's voice was calm but carried the weight of the law. You are both under arrest. Brenda completely lost it. She started screaming, a long, incoherent tirade of denials and accusations. The officers moved forward, professionally and efficiently. They cuffed Gary first. He didn't resist, he seemed to have completely deflated, a hollowed-out shell of the imposing man he had been just minutes before. As they put the cuffs on Brenda, she stopped screaming and locked her eyes on me. Her face was a twisted mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You will regret this, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that carried across the room. I will destroy you. You hear me? I will ruin you. It was her last, impotent threat. A final, pathetic gasp of a tyrant who had lost everything. The officers led them out, the camera following their every step, a silent witness to their final, public humiliation. The walk of shame. In the stunned silence that followed their exit, one of the elderly homeowners, a man Brenda had once fined for having a festive wreath on his door 2 days after New Year's, started to clap. It was a slow, hesitant clap at first. Then someone else joined in. And then another, and another, until the entire room erupted in applause. They weren't clapping for me, not really. They were clapping for their own liberation. The reign of terror was over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Brenda and Gary's story was the lead on the 10 o'clock news that night, my video playing in a continuous loop behind the anchor. The exposé on the paving scandal ran for a week, uncovering a web of corruption that went even deeper than I had imagined. Other contractors came forward. City officials were implicated. It was a full-blown scandal, and it all started with a can of gray paint and a slashed tire. Gary, facing overwhelming evidence, took a plea deal. He sang like a canary, detailing the entire kickback scheme to save himself from a longer sentence. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy. Vince from Apex Paving got 10. Several officials in the Public Works Department were fired and faced their own charges. Brenda refused any deal. She maintained her innocence, her delusion, right to the very end. The video evidence was irrefutable. She was convicted of felony vandalism and several lesser charges related to the HOA's financial mismanagement. Her unhinged threats at the meeting were played for the judge, who sentenced her to 18 months in state prison. They lost everything. Their house was sold to pay for legal fees and the massive restitution they owed to the city and the HOA. Their names became a local punchline, a cautionary tale of suburban hubris. In Willow Creek Estates, the change was immediate and profound. The old HOA board resigned in disgrace. A new board was elected, made up of reasonable people who actually cared about the community, not just the power. The first thing they did was a complete overhaul of the bylaws. The thick book of ridiculous rules was replaced with a simple, one-page document outlining basic standards of respect and upkeep. The reign of beige was over. People started planting flowers, painting their doors vibrant colors, putting up basketball hoops for their kids. The neighborhood started to feel like a community, not a prison camp. My neighbors, who had once been afraid to even speak to me, now treated me like a reluctant hero. They would stop to chat when I was out walking my dog, thank me for what I did. I appreciated the sentiment, but I never saw myself as a hero. I was just a man who wanted to be left alone, a man who had been pushed too far. I had been forced to fight, and I had used the tools I had, logic, patience, and a deep understanding of structural weaknesses. I had found the cracks in Brenda's foundation and applied pressure until the whole thing came crashing down. It was, in its own way, a problem of civil engineering. A few months after the sentencing, Frank O'Malley's company was awarded the contract to properly repave all the roads in our neighborhood and across the city. His crew came in and tore up the garbage asphalt that Apex had laid down. They did the job right, with the right materials and the right expertise. It was poetic justice, paid for with the restitution funds seized from Gary and Vince. I eventually became friends with Frank. We'd get coffee sometimes, two old guys who had found a common enemy in corruption. He told me that Dave, the whistleblower foreman, was now his right-hand man, and business had never been better. Sometimes, I think about Brenda's final, hollow threat. "I will ruin you," she had screamed. But she hadn't ruined me. She had done the opposite. She had inadvertently forced me out of the quiet shell I had built around myself after Martha died. She had reminded me that some things are worth fighting for: peace, dignity, the right to paint your own front door whatever color you damn well please. My life returned to the quiet I had originally sought, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the silence of absence and grief, it was the silence of peace, of a battle won and a community healed. I finally found the simple, uncomplicated existence I had been looking for. My door is still painted Iron Mountain gray. It looks good. It feels solid and dependable. It feels like home. And every time I look at it, I'm reminded that bullies only have the power you give them, and sometimes, the most effective weapon against chaos isn't a fist, but a well-documented, meticulously executed plan.